Donald Trump says the United States has agreed to a full and complete trade deal with South Korea.
오늘 새벽 한국 정부는 미국 정부와 관세 협상을 타결했습니다. 미국이 한국에 8월 1일부터 부과하기로 예고한 상호 관세 25%는 15%로 낮아집니다.
We're getting some details from the South Korean side. Can you just update us on what's being said from the South Korean side?
Yeah, look, the pressure has really been on South Korea this past week to reach this deal because the United States buys more from South Korea than any other country in the world other than China. And so South Korea has this huge trade surplus with the United States. So this deal was already so important. But what really amped the pressure up was the fact that Japan and the EU managed to secure these 15% deals last week. So for South Korean negotiators this week, really that 15% has been the marker that they absolutely have to hit so that they can continue selling their cars, their semiconductors at the same rate, and they can remain competitive. And we have heard this morning that they have managed to hit that 15%. So not only just on all goods, but that also covers their cars and their semiconductors as well. So this is being seen this morning as a success for South Korea. One of the worries here this week, as the negotiators have been really thrashing this out, is that because South Korea was now set on this 15% target, and frankly it would have been a disaster if it didn't hit it, that it was going to have to make concessions it didn't want to. But if you look at the details, there are some areas in which South Korea has really done quite well, chiefly that it hasn't had to compromise on its red lines. The red lines it set was that it didn't want to further open up its agricultural market, its rice and its beef markets to the United States. It didn't want to allow the US to sell more of its rice and beef products. It already has very strict rules on how much US rice it will buy and what sorts of beef, and this is to protect its farming industry. And farmers had said they were going to protest if there was any movement on this whatsoever. Now, we've heard this morning from the negotiators, the South Korean negotiators who are still in Washington, that the Americans pushed them really hard on this, but they were able to stay strong. But even though this is being seen as a success here in South Korea this morning, it is worth noting that, you know, yes, given the current climate, we can call it a success. But up until this point, South Korea actually had a free trade agreement with the United States. So goods going either way were not really being taxed at all.
Yeah, but we have seen with free trade agreements that they're not being adhered to, right? Even Singapore has a free trade agreement, but is going to be subject to 10% tariffs as of tomorrow. Jean, is there any concerns going forward? We're hearing that prices might get pushed up for the American customer. Is there any concern in South Korea about the demand for the goods that it produces?
Yeah, look, that has always been a concern here, but I think one of the, as I said, the key thing for South Korea was making sure that it got that 15%, which is what Japan has, which is what the EU has. So it does mean that it can continue selling its cars, which we know are very popular in the United States, and its semiconductors, which the United States needs a lot of, at the same rate as these other very large exporters. So actually it does now have the ability to remain competitive. The other side of this deal is the investment that South Korea has promised the United States, $350 billion. And again, if you look at the detail of that, some of that really is in South Korea's favour. So the biggest bulk of this money, £150 billion, that's going to go into the US shipbuilding industry. And this was a key part of South Korea's strategy. It has a thriving shipbuilding industry, and it really wanted to be able to share those expertise with the US and get those companies, these big companies here in South Korea, Hyundai, Hanwha, into the United States. And then the other money that is being promised, it seems is going to come from investments that the South Koreans had already promised the United States under the Biden administration. They just hadn't managed to deliver yet. So money that is going to help with US manufacturing of cars, of electric vehicle batteries, of semiconductors, all things that South Korea is very good at.
Honestly, really disappointing. I don't think that these tariffs are necessary, especially against South Korea.
But now I'm actually increasing prices and slowly moving those costs to my customers.
물가는 꿈틀대고 전문가들은 경고해도 트럼프 대통령과 참모들은 관세는 외국에서 세금을 걷는 것이라고 포장하여 자화자찬을 이어가고 있습니다.